and then ask questions. Um, but as always, the slides get sent to everybody who registers. As always, you have my email address. If you want to have some follow-up discussion after you've read the slides in more depth, I'm always happy to entertain that with
Hey,
you.
Ed,
I love to hear people hear back from people because sometimes I don't get it all quite right. Sometimes I miss some aspects. Sometimes I even get a thing wrong once in a while. And I love to get feedback from
so we have started the live YouTube video. If you do not want your faces shown, please turn off your video. But we do love to see everybody's face on here, and thank you for being here. Ed, go ahead.
Well, as I said, there's a lot of slides. This is a very deep topic. In fact, things change daily on this stuff. So I can't say this is up to date to today since I did this in the middle of last month. But I didn't do a presentation for NWSOFA in Thanksgiving because things got hectic towards the end and I was out of town for a while. So I kind of consider this to be my November presentation. I'm going to do another one in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I'm going to do one on the situation with the drug boats in the Caribbean because
Okay.
that's a very important thing. It's very timely, and I kind of wish I'd done it today. But I wanted to get this. We advertised the SCOTUS presentation, so we're going to do the SCOTUS presentation.
Okay, we are going to be talking a little information about our sponsor here. Um, and Debbie, if you'd let me know when you can see the presentation.
Okay.
Okay.
We have the start.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. As Ed said, today's presentation is When the Supreme Court Breaks the Rules. And the subtitle, of course, is SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States Acting Outside the Law, with Ed Spire here. And this is being brought to you by NWSOFA, which stands for Northwest Suburbs of Chicago. And that OFA stands for Organizing for Action. We've been doing this for 13 years now. And we've been an Indivisible chapter for about 8 years. We are one of 2,700, almost 2,800 chapters across the country. Every one of those little dots makes a difference. We exist to help you understand the facts, sharpen your arguments, and be able to communicate to your members and to your audiences. That is our whole goal. NWSOFA was originally started in the northwest suburbs, the land beyond O'Hare. We had 17 members that started us. Today we have 9,700 members, and we have a Zoom membership of over 23,000 just since January of this year. We are organized on the twin snowflake principle. On the left side, you can see our communication snowflake. On the right side, you can see all of our issue teams. And at the beginning of this year, we had 10 issue teams. Those are the turquoise ones going around, starting with gun violence prevention when we first started, right after Sandy Hook, and then healthcare reform, immigration reform, social justice reform, our Stand With Women programs, our fiscal and economic programs, and our election outreach, both the federal, state, and local, climate change. And then we added our Restore Our Democracy, two of them. One which focuses on voting rights, elections, gerrymandering, etc. And then the second rod started with confronting disinformation, but has morphed into the issues of the day, like today, like what Ed is doing today. We are run by 30 all volunteer leads that help us both on the communication side and on our issue sides. And on that issue snowflake, the outside was the 10, and then we have 9 new issue teams that have been added since the beginning of the year. If you click on the QR code, you go to what we now call a link tree, which quickly takes you to wherever you want to go. You can go to our websites, you can go to our sign up contact forms, you can go to our Substack, our Blue Sky, you can go to our YouTube. Each one of those are unique. I'm showing a graphic of our Substack. Every day we put up a Substack information that we have gleaned from our coffee and conversation at 9 o'clock every morning, Monday through Friday. And you can see there's some great information on that. And then as we are recording on this uh, issue, you can see new issue teams videos that are located on our NWSOFA.org website. You can just go to that, then go to the live, which is right in the center at the top there. When you click on the YouTube uh, and go to live, and you can pick up anything that we have done for the last, probably 4 months now. We are going to do questions and answers after the presentation, but it's not going to be live. We're asking you to type your questions as they're going through the presentation and start that question out with, in all caps, question. And at the end of the presentation, our co-host will have consolidated and asked those questions to the speaker. Hopefully we can get this all done in an hour and a half. And I've actually scheduled 2 hours just because I know how this works. So without any further ado, Ed, who is our Restore Democracy co-lead, please start your presentation.
Thank you, Bill. Let me share my screen. Replace current share with this. All right. So, here's what we're going to talk about today. A little bit about why I think I get to talk about this, what my sources are, some description of the power and the lawless behavior, with a bunch of specific examples along the Second Amendment rights, reproductive rights, yada yada yada. And how did we get here? What can we do? Those are probably the most important parts. I'm not an attorney. I'm just a citizen. I just look at SCOTUS the way a citizen would look at it. I focus on restoring our democracy. And I had that in here because I was speaking to the American Association of University Women. I work with other groups, the League of Women Voters, on election issues. I've done a lot of work in the Electoral College. But my study of SCOTUS is kind of tangential to all the above areas of interest. Uh, but I do pursue important sources. I look at newsletters. I always listen to what Heather Scott Richardson has to say. Once again, you're going to get a copy of these slides. You'll have all these links. You can follow them. You don't have to try and write down notes. I highly recommend Paul Krugman. Um, uh, I do a lot of discussion on social media, and I have 3 books that I strongly recommend to you. This one is one of the primary sources for this presentation. This is written by a professor of law at University of Michigan Law School. She's a co-host of a podcast about the Supreme Court, um, and she's got a specific viewpoint. One of the things I'll say about her, if you look at what that book says, how the Supreme Court runs on conservative grievance, fringe theories, and bad vibes. I kind of felt that bad vibes was a little bit too flighty a term. So anywhere in anything I took from her, I replaced the words bad vibes with unhelpful attitudes. I think that's a little more professional way to talk about what's going on. This is another great book. I've done a presentation in the past on this. If you haven't seen it and you want to see it, you can let me know and I'll send you the slides. But these 2 guys really help understand us, what's happening in our country, and how democracy is really in danger. And this is another one that came out recently. This guy is a guy who did financial reporting for decades from across the world, and talks about how globalization has been pushing our country in the wrong direction economically. Though I recommend those books, but that one is the primary one used here. Uh, Suffice to say that SCOTUS is pretty powerful. Think about it this way. SCOTUS is in charge of interpreting and understanding our Constitution. And changing our Constitution is not supposed to be easy. Um, it's got to have a lot of public support expressed through state legislatures. Uh, 3/4 of the states have to amend any change to our Constitution. But if SCOTUS effectively amends our Constitution themselves every time they change their minds about what they think our Constitution means. And example, the most drastic revision I can imagine was the revision in the Heller case quite a while back, where up until that point, the Second Amendment was never thought to give anyone the right to own a weapon personally, and that had been that way for 100 years, and they decided no, that's not what it means. It means something else. So, I mean, we could have amended the Constitution to change what that means. We didn't. We couldn't because it's too hard to amend the Constitution. You really need everybody involved to be wanting to do it. But they can do it with a snap of the fingers. And they don't even limit themselves to striking down laws based on what they think is in the Constitution. In 1977, they invalidated the federal gun control measure, even after conceding that there is no constitutional text speaking to this precise question. So they act on their own opinion, not just what they believe the Constitution says, but what they think is good for our country. In 96, it struck down another federal law because we have to understand that the Constitution stands not so much for what it says as what it means. I mean, what they think it means. So they interpret the Constitution, but they also interpret federal laws. Even putting aside the court's ability to invalidate laws, the court power to interpret laws, to state what federal laws mean, besides what the Constitution means, that's even bigger deal than most people understand. Way back in 1803, they took it upon themselves to decide that they had the ability to interpret what a congressional law meant and to strike down part or all of a congressional law, uh, simply because they don't think it's the appropriate thing to do. That's the court's power of a judicial review, not only of the Constitution, but of federal statutes. And that's not clearly outlined in the founding documents. The Constitution doesn't say SCOTUS gets to do that. They took it upon themselves. Um, an example is in 1819. Um, in this case, SCOTUS interpreted the necessary and proper clause expansively, allowing Congress to charter a national bank. This was seen as a bold, some argue egregious read of what vastly broadened federal power, setting precedent for future expansions at the expense of state authority. So that they've done a lot to structure this country more than the founding fathers themselves did in many ways. More recent examples of where they redefined federal law. They decided that qualified immunity was appropriate and that by narrowly reading statutes meant to hold officials accountable, the court effectively created broad protection from civil lawsuits for police and for government agents, unless a prior case had clearly established that a right had been violated. This reading this is not explicitly stated in any law by Congress, but it severely limits our recourse for egregious official misconduct. Another recent change that was a big change is the Chevron defense. Uh, for decades, the Supreme Court's interpretation of federal law included the doctrine of what's called the Chevron defense, which meant that courts would defer to federal agencies' reasonable interpretation of ambiguous statutes. If Congress says we want you to do something in this area and do something to solve this problem, and it doesn't say specifically exactly what to do, that in the past, the administration, which has policy experts, would decide what's the best way to do what Congress said. Well, now the court has overturned that and has said that if the law is ambiguous, it's not the president's administration that's going to decide what to do about that. It's the court. Well, the court doesn't have any expertise. Um, So the result of that is that we just have to get a Congress to work better, to write more clear laws, and they impact our elections. You know, in 2024, they were deliberating two cases. One addressed whether the rank and file participants could be convicted of obstructing justice, obstruction of official proceeding, that is the January 6th certification of votes. The other one was whether Trump, as a former president, was immune from criminal prosecution. Now, in both cases, the court sided with Trump, and in fact, they elected to draw out the immunity case, not making any decision at all for months and months, such that Trump was all but guaranteed not to face a trial before the election. And in the same period, they issued a decision holding that Trump could appear on the ballot in 2024, notwithstanding his role in the Stop the Steal movement. Other courts, lower courts, had concluded that the 14th Amendment barred Trump from holding office. But the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. All of the Supreme Court's January 6th related interventions cleared the way for Trump to run for president again and to be reelected. One thing about SCOTUS is it's hard to understand what they do. Um, it's powerful, but it's also very poorly understood. And that makes the court dangerous. You know, it's easy for the court to get away with say, oh, let's aspiring instructionists off the hook when people aren't paying close attention, or if people think they must have misunderstood what's happening because it couldn't possibly be that ridiculous. But well, it was that ridiculous. They have jargon heavy rules. They have interpretive methods such as textualism, originalism, semantic canons. All that seems to suggest, well, you civilians out there just don't understand, so leave this law business to us. And that claim is that when they put on their black robes, they ascend to some higher apolitical plane. But come on, all humans have biases, and you simply can't always escape all of them. And I think it's pretty clear what's going on in our court right now that these guys have biases too. Um, the bottom line is what they're doing is pretty lawless. They're running on conservative grievances, fringe theories, destructive mindsets. The majority of justices, all the ones who were appointed by Republican presidents, they're convinced that Republicans are being treated unfairly by the increasingly diverse society that no longer shares the views of the extreme right. And as their party demands more and more to make up for this supposed travesty, more political power, more societal support, more, the Republican justices are more than happy to give it to them. Conservative grievances and mindset is as bizarre as it sounds. It insists that conservatives are being victimized because they're conservatives. In other words, Ginny Thomas said it out loud. She said conservatives and Republicans are tired of being a minority, of being the oppressed minority. So that's kind of mind-boggling. Who's a minority? Well, the extreme right is a minority in terms of voters. You know, the patriotic response of somebody who's a minority and wants more power would be to build more political support. Um, but attempting and succeeding to wield power as a minority without getting more votes is just inconsistent with our principles. They're oppressed. Our country has changed over the last several decades. We're more diverse, we're more inclusive, we have more inclusive median political views, and these changes all trend against the GOP's views on feminism, on race, on corporate power, even on democracy itself. Uh, that shift in public opinion means they're oppressed. They think they're losing their country. They'll do anything to stop it from happening. Here's an example of their viewpoint of oppression. This is words taken from an actual 2015 opinion of some actual Republicans and pre-court justices. The court said allowing gay people to get married facilitates the marginalization of the many Americans who have traditional ideas about marriage, and even recalls the harsh treatment of gays and lesbians in the past. Are you kidding me? According to that grievance fueled viewpoint, allowing gay people to get married is just like prohibiting gay people from getting married. What? Allowing gay people to marry is mean to people who don't want gay people to be married? It's just like prohibiting gay people from getting married was mean to gay people who wanted to get married. Think about that for a minute. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And yet, that's what they wrote. And this has been going on since the early 2000s, and some of it even before that. Um, the Republican appointed justices, uh, they they reason in the register of petty, spiteful party talking points. And when their sources conveniently associated with law points in one direction, the justices go in the other when their innermost feelings or the atmosphere at their conservative billionaire funded dinner parties holds them. The result? Opinions that read like Republican fan fiction, a mishmash of law, mindset, fantasy, facts, and alternative facts. And this shady law that they're bringing forth escapes notice because the Supreme Court's politics look different, they sound different from the politics of elected officials, and the country hasn't quite figured out how to crack this shell game they're playing on us. There's a ton of overlap between politics and what the court is doing, the ideas about what our laws are and how to interpret it. I mean, it's no coincidence that all of a sudden, uh, all the things that the Republicans think should be law are coming out of SCOTUS when they haven't come out of SCOTUS for decades. That's not a coincidence. Um, think about the ideas of originalism. The idea of religion that is that we have to protect the things the way they used to be. There were more rigid racial and social hierarchies in the past, and originalism says we have to stick with them or take the interpretive theory that places a thumb on the scale against corporate regulation, like the major question doctrine. And that overlaps with the Republican Party's loose political philosophy of limited government and its political preference for less industry regulation. It's just no coincidence that at the very moment the Republicans gained a supermajority on the Supreme Court in 2020, the court suddenly realized that the Constitution required the country to adopt the Republican Party's platform on abortion, on voting rights, on industry regulation, on campaign finance, on a bunch of other stuff too. That's not a coincidence. Just imagine a world where, after stopping a state from counting votes and therefore ensuring a Republican president, a Republican Supreme Court justice tells the country to just get over it on CBS 60 Minutes, no less. Or a world where a justice takes 10 minutes to look over a 98-page opinion that does away with a woman's right to reproductive freedom and says, sounds great to me. And according to the New York Times, 10 minutes after Justice Alito circulated his draft opinion overturning Roe v. Wade, Justice Gorsuch said, it's fine with him. Imagine a world where judges quote conservative broadcaster Ben Shapiro's 2014 book, How to Debate Leftists and Destroy Them, and then the justices appear on his podcast. Imagine a world where diversity is illegal, and that's not a joke. One of Trump's nominees has suggested that the use of the term diversity may, in and of itself, be evidence of discriminatory intent. We're living. Oh, I just hit the wrong key. I got to back up here. Imagine a world. Uh, Imagine that world where we're living in that. We're living in that word now. Conservative grievance, the industrial complex has shown no sign of slowing down. If anything, it's picking up steam. The justices are emboldened. After all, in the first presidential election after the Republican justices overruled Roe v. Wade, the justices and the party that appointed them paid no political price for that wildly unpopular, catastrophic decision to end constitutional protection for abortion. Instead, the Republican candidate for president who had appointed three of the justices was reelected, and the Republican justices cleared the path for his candidacy, and the Republican gained control of the Senate. These guys probably feel like they face no political pushback for embracing these fringe positions that upend our society and our government as we know it. The SCOTUS is clearly partisan. It's repeatedly elevating fringe sentiments, political views of the Republican Party. The Republicans justices are turning out different jurisprudential theories and doctrines that ignore the views of people who, for the most part, are not part of the modern Republican coalition. Sometimes the sore winners on the court are fashioning legal rules that pretty much stick it to those groups as well. Republican appointed justices seem to think that the real victim of discrimination today are the Republicans, who no longer enjoy the kind of outsized influence, political power, social standing they once had. They think the Republicans are supposed to be the big men on campus for all time. One of those big men, Brett Kavanaugh, along with his fellow Federalist Society fraternity brothers and Amy, they seem to want to make sure they'll always be the big man on campus. And they invent stories about how Republicans are the ones being harmed today, they cause real harm to real people. They are extremely biased. They're using their shadow docket to express their bias. Bill pointed out to me that just today, the shadow docket decided that the Texas can continue with their extreme gerrymandering to try and get 5 more House seats. They didn't make a ruling as to whether that was valid or not. They just said, we'll rule on it later, but for now, they can go ahead. And by the time they issue a ruling, it's too late. The election will already have been run under the gerrymandered districts. They do that repeatedly. They are repeatedly using this shadow docket where they just say we're going to let this happen or we're not going to let this happen without actually ruling on anything. And as long as the destruction doesn't seem to touch them personally, oh, they seem to be just fine allowing Trump to dismiss heads of independent agencies. But when it comes to dismissing the head of the Fed, well, that one they wouldn't let them do. Maybe that's because they all have stock portfolios. Imagine. Um, so, there are forces that are shaping the court. There are political culture. They help shape this court to be what it is right now. Um, Politics center on the court as an organizing point for movements, and the courts shape those political systems. The courts provided building blocks for causes and solidified some group powers while undermining the powers of others. History and politics can help explain how the court came to be and how deep the problem is. So Justice Coney Bryant says, you really just read with the opinion. If you don't think we're doing the right thing, read the opinion. So let's do that. Let's actually look at some of these opinions, see what the court has done, and see what sense it makes. Um, See how the court's fondness for conservative agreements, fringe theories, unhelpful viewpoint is just pushing the court to be lawless. The first one is the one I mentioned earlier. In 2008, they radically reinterpreted the Second Amendment as to now guaranteeing individual right to possess a firearm rather than the traditional view, which had been in place for 100 years, of linking the Second Amendment to military service, that it allows a state to form and arm a state militia. And that has had tremendous effects on our public safety. I've had 200 years of precedence by declaring personal right to keep guns for home defense, disconnected from military service. It invalidated all kinds of long-standing handgun bans, restricting lawmakers' ability to address gun violence through regulation, catalyzed an explosion in gun ownership and explosion in profitability for gun manufacturers, which is, by the way, why it happened, because the gun manufacturers lobbied for it so they can make more money. It was widely criticized as judicial activism and bad history, misrepresenting the framers' intent. And despite affirming some limits on gun regulation, Heller has made effective gun control much more difficult. And that is exactly why our American gun violence epidemic is out of control. They did that to us. They just recently did this to us. They dramatically reshaped the reproductive rights in the U.S., most notably by overturning Roe v. Wade. That was put in place in 73, and it stood for a long time. In 92, it was reaffirmed, but did allow some states to impose some restrictions as long as they did not pose an undue burden. In 2022, it was completely overturned, ruling there is no constitutional right, and that returning the rights to the states. Well, let me say something about returning rights to states. When you return rights to states, and we know that state legislatures have been heavily gerrymandered, we know the states are not going to implement the rights that the people want. Look at Wisconsin. I mean, they have a blue governor, one blue senator, one red senator. They have a deeply red legislature. And if you think that the state legislature is going to do what the average person in Wisconsin wants along these lines, you're just wrong. The state legislature is going to do what the extreme right wants. So when the courts handed this control back to the states, they handed it to in many states, more than half of the states, they handed it to extreme right wing forces. Um, and we now have a fractured legal landscape. Access to reproductive health care is determined by states. There's no constitutional protection. Um, it's just got a terrible human side. There's real world consequences of this. Led to stories like Marion Mitchell Hollis in Tennessee, where providers refused medical necessary abortion for life threatening ectopic pregnancy. And the laws in many states now are such that you have to be near death before they can act to help you. And if you're near death, the chances are good that they can't help you anymore. There's lasting trauma here for both parents and children. They're criminalizing emergency care. Several Republican appointed Supreme Court justices signal a willingness to let states ban emergency abortion care, even when it's there to save a woman's life or her future fertility. Um, there's a surge in maternal harm and death. Um, we see pregnant women in states with bans suffered severe injury, long-term disability, preventable deaths, often forced to wait until near death to get the treatment. There's a real human side to what they've done to us here. And where will that go? It could go against broader rights. The methodology used in striking down Dobbs, that is, limit the rights of those deeply rooted only in the 18th and 19th century law, that directly threatens other privacy and liberties, including contraception, possibly even no fault divorce. There's a backlash against gender equality. This decision is rooted in a long legal and political movement pushing America back towards traditional gender hierarchies and patriarchal control, with rhetoric and legal efforts targeting conception, sex education, even the right to divorce. This concept of fetal personhood, new legal strategies. Some courts are entertaining the idea of giving civil rights to embryos and fetuses, posing the risk of criminalizing abortion nationwide, blocking IVS, targeting contraception. Uh, there's You start going down these roads, and they can take them way further than you could possibly imagine. They can go after marriage equality using the same kind of techniques. Um, we had a 2015 decision that established a nationwide constitutional right, but there are ongoing challenges. Um, in 2013. There was a case that struck down key provisions of the Defense of Marriage Act. 2015 is when we had the 5-4 decision that states must license and recognize same-sex marriages. Um, but the sending justice argued the courts overstepped its authority, and there's ongoing debates about judicial reach and states' rights. Recent developments indicate that the court may be open to revisiting or restricting marriage equality in the future. And while the decision that allowed it was a crucial advance, uncertainty remains regarding the durability of marriage equality in this court. Uh, Look more deeply here. After Obergefell, when it was ruled a constitutional right, the conservative movement launched some very fierce backlash. Republican appointed justices adopted the view that guaranteeing these rights itself is in discrimination against religious conservatives who oppose marriage equality. 2023, there was an addition to allow business owners to refuse service for same-sex weddings on First Amendment rights grounds. Um, this opens the door to widespread legalized discrimination under the guise of free speech and religious liberty. And there is Thomas and Alito have both signaled they want to overturn the decision that provided for same-sex marriage. Their reasoning and their coordinated wave of First Amendment litigation means marriage equality rights are vulnerable to narrowing or reversing in the future terms. Uh, where will this go? The same kind of logic can be applied to other rights, even when not only upholding uh, uh, same-sex marriage. Recent cases show the court carving out exceptions, undermining the practical rights, undermining their practical rights to family protections like joint adoption, birth certificate listing, cohabitation. Um, and there's a chilling pattern beyond marriage. The same reasoning behind Dobbs overturning Roe can be applied to Lawrence intimacy, to Obergefell itself. Both arguments for marriage equality were based on the unpopular substantive due process and priority doctrines now being attacked by this court. And there's just broader cultural wars here. Recent years have seen surges in lower court and legislative attacks on both marriage and transgender rights, enabled by the court's shifting approach. When the court says, we maybe should look at this, then somebody in some right-wing jurisdiction raises a case to look at it, so hoping that that case will get up to the Supreme Court. In fact, in many cases, the statements out of the court are inviting people to bring cases that will allow the court to re-examine past precedents. And this court has no problem in getting a past precedents. Think about some things. I'm going to start going through some of these slides a little faster. Think about the fact that we now have created immunity for the president. This insulates future presidents from criminal prosecution, meaning not everyone is above. Some people are above the law. The president is now above the law. Think about political corruption. There have been cases where um, the federal government obtained convictions uh, of corruption, and the Supreme Court threw those convictions out. There was a case in Virginia where the governor had uh, helped a business, arranged meetings, hosted events, made referrals, and caused some large amount of business to go to a friend of his. And they said that that's a bribe, that was bribery because there was official acts to help out this other company. And the Supreme Court said, well, we don't think that holding a meeting or hosting an event is an official act. So they threw out the case. They've overturned other high profile corruption cases like this. These kind of decisions legalize influence peddling. They allow public officials to accept lavish gifts as long as no explicit government decision directly follows. There's another one. Snyder, Mayor Snyder in a small town, he let a contract for a million bucks for some garbage trucks. And then next year, he got a $13,000 payment from the truck dealer. And the feds looked at that and said, well, that's bribery. He gave him the contract and they gave him the kickback. And the Supreme Court, and they got a conviction and sent him to jail. And the Supreme Court overturned it, saying that if it's a bribe, it's got to come before the action. If it comes after the action, it's not a bribe. It's just a gratuity. Again, that rulings like that weaken our tools for combating corruption. They erode public trust. They're doing the job on voting rights. They're just taking the Voting Rights Act apart piece by piece. I don't want to go into that in depth. We have too many slides to go through. I'm only halfway through this slide deck. Let's not look at that much. You can read those slides. We are trending towards oligarchy here. We're sliding towards an area where political and economic power is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a small group of ultra wealthy individuals and corporations. Um, and these developments represent a clear shift away from representative democracy, as the voice of everyday Americans are increasingly drowned out by the concentration of wealth and influence. And the Supreme Court has got no problems with that. They're campaigning. The Supreme Court's campaign finance rulings have accelerated these trends. They've unleashed unlimited political spending. They've weakened our democratic guardrails. Um, I don't want to do a deeper look. We got too many slides to look at. You can read those slides later. The thing that worries me a lot is this unitary executive principle. The idea that the president runs the administration and he can do whatever he wants with his administration. There's no such thing as independent agencies, even if Congress says there are. They have allowed the president to remove executive branch officials who have been approved by Congress. They have ruled that Congress cannot insulate the director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau from an at-will removal. They've said that um, uh, finding the limiting the president's power to remove the head of the federal housing agency violated the Constitution. They're not allowing Congress to limit political influence in our government. The Congress sets up independent agencies just so they won't be pushed around by political winds. That's why the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, so that some politician doesn't get to decide what the interest rates are, that economists decide this kind of thing for the best, the good of our economy. With the Fed, the SCOTUS has said, yeah, that one will be separate. But all the other ones that Congress said have to be separate, Congress, the SCOTUS has said, no, those aren't separate. Trump can fire anybody he wants there. And that shifts power away from Congress, away from the independent agencies, and strengthens the president's authority to allow the guy to do whatever he wants. And SCOTUS is concentrating power in itself. They attacked the administrative state. They held the conservative justices and politicians have held a decade-long strategy to undermine and dismantle the modern federal administrative state. The agencies such as the EPA, the CDC, HHS, not merely as philosophical project, but in concert with industry and donor networks seeking to minimize regulation and concentrate executive power in the executive. The SCOTUS is taking those powers onto itself with the major questions doctrine we've talked about already. Deregulation and judicial policy, the doctrine in SCOTUS is consistently applied to block regulatory policies associated with Democratic administrations and to enable deregulation favored by the Republicans. They have power to remove and direct. Congress's jurisprudence increasingly treats all major agency powers as presidential. The president must have the ability to direct and remove all executive officials as far as possible. And that's not what Congress intended. That is not what Congress tried to set up and has set up, and it's not what we've had for decades. Uh, what we are experiencing here is a tyranny of the minority. Um, the tyranny of the minority is undermining expertise. It's undermining accountability. Um, its project has been mapped out as far back as 1971. Um, it was expanded under Reagan and has been greatly escalated under Trump's appointees in the Federal Society. All of that, all the way back to 71, with the intent of making presidential power total regarding execution of the law at the expense of Congress and the public. The Congress is supposed to represent us. And the president, somebody said to me, you have a representative form of government in the US. I said, yeah, we do. Congress is the representative form of government. Every every voter gets to vote for a representative and a senator, and there's 100 senators and 500 representatives. That's the expression of public will in our government. The president is not the expression of public will in our government. The president is just supposed to do what Congress tells him to do. And Congress is supposed to be where our representative government comes from. But all these things have diminished Congress and strengthened the president so that our representative government does not work as well as it should have. Doctrines have been used to block climate action, student debt relief, pandemic public health measures, economic redistribution programs, all of that overriding majority support in Congress. Congress represented the public and passed these laws, and the president now can just take them apart because SCOTUS says he can. There are small, everyday things that we can do to start change. It's as simple as getting people to be angry, convincing them they are right to be angry. It means persuading people that the court is wrong. I think we can do that. I think I've laid out a pretty good case right here, and you're going to have all these slides, so you can do some of that too. It's about requiring advocacy, organizing. We have to persuade people to care about all this stuff I just told you about. Friends shouldn't let friends remain in the dark about the Supreme Court. Be they friends you meet at the dog park, exercise class, synagogue, church, mosque, coffee shop, wherever. Talk about this stuff. All our existing networks are possible sites for advocacy. Talking to your friends is one way of getting your friends involved. Um, and you need to stay informed. You need to stay informed because you want to make sure that elections and state and local judges, those are important things. Starting at the bottom is important. Inform yourself and your network about who's running for Congress, who's running for your state legislatures, what their values are, what their vibes are, what kind of judicial nominees will they pick. When we pick politicians, they're picking the viewpoints that drive judicial decision making, maybe for decades. So it's fair to ask when you vote, do you want the viewpoint to be that equality means equality for LGBT people, or that equality means allowing some discrimination against LGBT people? We got to ask our politicians, our candidates, these questions. Choices like that will be in every election for a foreseeable future. We have to keep working on this every time we consider voting. I know you don't have time to research all the local, state, and federal candidates. Uh, that's why there are organizations that you can turn to for advice, and we'll see what some of those are. So talk to your politicians. Uh, Politicians are supposed to respond to people. Means politicians need to hear from us. Go to town halls. Go to endorsement meetings. Um, Ask your candidates, federal candidates, about the Supreme Court and other federal courts. Ask your state and local candidates about state and local courts. Call your senators about judicial nominees. Politicians need to know that these issues matter to voters, and we need to tell them, not just once. Call them every week if it's a time when a nominee is being considered. Call them every day if you think the nominee is the bad guy. Um, it's not just developing a narrative about the importance of the courts, but sticking to that narrative and accompanying the action plan over longer time just to catch up. Use social media. Our opponents use it. Have some fun with it. Um, on the heels of some reporting about courts corruption, Washington Post satirist columnist proposed three different levels of sponsoring Supreme Court justices. Uh, Look at the robes, all that wasted space. Where the names of sponsors could be. Uh, Sam Alito, brought to you by the Federal Society, or Brett Nicola Ultra Kavanaugh. So, you can have some fun and get your message across this way. I do some of this stuff, but the ultimate tool is voting. And of course, in addition to advocacy and organizing, there is voting. Sounds like a bare minimum, but it is the engine of democracy. Vote in every single election at every level. Motivate all your friends and associates and family members to do so. The way our institutions change for good is through our elections. Work to win them. Encourage officials to use their resulting authority to make things easier for our democracy. Make it easier for candidates to obtain political power if they win people's votes and represent every voter. Remember, voting is how we got here. The Republicans who made the court what it is today, they knew the importance of elections and obtaining political power. They had strategies that required such sense of urgency, a long-term commitment, and a willingness not to let the perfect be the enemy of progress. Even if a candidate isn't perfect, no one will be. The reality is that every election is an opportunity to shape the court for decades. It's fine to have a minimum threshold along the lines of not voting for any candidate who participated in a coup. But there are things to learn from the Republican legal movement, how they got here. And we shouldn't be deprecating all of it in its entirely, seizing power in spite of democracy, trying to find a way to beat democracy, have to be off the table. But winning elections, putting in the candidates that we know will move us in the right direction, that's how they got us. That's a lot of how they got here, and we can do the same. Voting is how they did it. We can do that too. Um, Republicans fed on exaggerated sense of grievance that the courts are being unfair. Progressives can say the same thing about the federal courts today, and it has the virtue of being true. The courts really are coming for a lot of what progressive people care about. There's value to identifying a common punching bag, source of grievance. Turns out to be an effective organizing tool. And we've seen that in the No King stuff recently. Um, the Republican takeover, of course, is proof of concept. They did it. We can do it too. We can turn it back. It's not going to be easy. The courts have made it harder to use democracy, which makes fixing things seem even more daunting. The country's political system, including the Senate and Electoral College, creates a risk of minority rule. Sometimes means that winning a national majority is insufficient to obtain political power. Um, their Republican-controlled courts have found ways to stack the odds against democracy. They've enabled gerrymandering. They've enabled voter suppression. They've enabled voter discrimination. They've enabled political corruption by giving wealthy outside influence. They've unleashed massive amounts of political spending. That all that makes it more difficult. But we can't allow ourselves to become discouraged. Um, the elections are skewed by the anti-government pathologies. Makes it easier for the government to pass laws and regulations that make government seem kind of awful, like a lost cause. They also make it harder for the government to do the things that people want. Uh, when the government is able to take measures to solve people's problems, and the court undoes them, including when elected officials try to protect voting rights, uh, this is a real problem. We need to fight the sense that it's just too hard. We can't give up. We can't be demoralized about it. We have to remember that advocacy can work. It can work, and it can work relatively quickly. Um, Joe Biden, take his evolution on Supreme Court reforms. He was a longtime institutionalist. He previously chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee. He had been defending the court, even when it disagreed with him. But when he was a candidate in 2020, in fact, when he was a candidate in 2020, he opposed Supreme Court reform, even though other Democratic candidates supported it. But in response to pressure from the Democratic base, he promised to appoint a Supreme Court commission to look into it. And after he was elected, he made a commission that was empowered to write a report. 3 years later, Biden ultimately endorsed three Supreme Court reforms. So he did turn around. He did decide we should have term limits. We should have a binding code of ethics. We should have an amendment to overturn court's decisions on presidential immunity. So in his case, advocacy did work, and it can work in other ways as well. What's the GOP's response? Well, after Biden proposed these reforms, McConnell said that these reforms would seize control of the court. It would end our independent judiciary. Um, People like Mitch McConnell can't tell you that you're the one for politicizing the court. Heck, they politicized the heck out of the court. So we start locally. We start with local elections, and that can help too. For example, in 2024, the North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Allison Riggs, who was a former voting rights litigator, and her Republican challenge came down to a few hundred votes, just a few hundred votes, caused the North Carolina Supreme Court to swing one way or another on voting rights. Uh, and the effect of such elections can be profound. In Arizona, Supreme Court had issued a ghoulish opinion that said it was illegal for federal courts to consider evidence of a defendant's innocence when that evidence had not been previously presented to a state court because the defendant's state-appointed lawyer was no good. That issue arose to SCOTUS. And then that issue, uh, four judges decided he didn't commit the crime, but the court said that they didn't care. It was Jones's fault that his ineffective state-appointed lawyer had not presented that evidence. They actually said a state prisoner is responsible for counsel's negligent failure to develop the record, including evidence of the defendant's innocence. The ruling seemed to condemn this guy to death. Well, the local voters took that to themselves. The local voters in Arizona, after Roe v. Wade and all that, they got a Democratic candidate for Attorney General, and this new Attorney General signed off an agreement that released this guy from prison after he served 29 years for a crime he did not commit. That wouldn't have happened if 280 people. He won by 280 votes. If those 280 people hadn't voted, that guy would still be in jail. Local votes can work. We can't know the names of those voters or any of the people who helped them vote, but those guys helped save an innocent man from prison and death. Think about Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, they've had a very heavily gerrymandered legislature for a long time, but in 2017, the state Supreme Court was split, and the conservative justices up for re-election that year ran unopposed. He ran unopposed. Progressives let conservatives keep a seat. Uh, Things changed then because people decided to do something about it. Two women decided to do the right thing and challenge the sitting justices. Before 2020, there was only one successful challenge to a sitting justice. But when these Progressive Party challengers succeeded in winning her election, the Democratic Party perked up. Party organizers and volunteers started to invest in judicial elections. And then in 2023, they flipped another Supreme Court seat. And in the first time for a long time, the 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 Wisconsin Supreme Court was had a Democratic majority, and the first thing they did was to use that power to make elections more democratic. They invalidated the Wisconsin legislature's extremely gerrymandered state map for state legislative seats. So get yourself some officials who will work to better your democracy. You can do it locally in your state. Same kind of thing happened in Michigan. Um, these successes are not easy. They require a lot of work. You don't have to do an ultra marathon, but you got to pitch in. You got to educate yourself. You got to educate others. You got to vote, persuade others to vote, and throw in some resources, throw in a few bucks here and there. Um, the heroes are the organizers and door knockers who turn out the vote. And if you really want to get involved, you can get involved in canvassing and turning out the vote. Uh, if things are going to change, it's not just because some lawyers walked into the Supreme Court with some especially clever argument. No, things are going to change. They have to change because we do the political work of making that change. It seems daunting, but look again. It's often repeated that something like 80,000 voters in 3 states gave the country Trump. But there's another way to look at it. Getting to a different result, ensuring a different kind of candidate, that could have been done with about 25,000 votes in 3 states. That's not that many votes out of what, 150 million? If we had done the right work, if we had the right candidate, if we had gotten 25,000 different votes in 3 states, we wouldn't be where we are today. That's not so hard. Two voters per precinct would have done it. Two voters per precinct. That doesn't seem impossible. No, the court resists these solutions. The court makes it harder. The law securing freedom could be struck down or whittled down. Laws regulating granting student debt aren't safe. All of our laws are under attack. The list goes on and on. So we're going to need to reform this court. We're going to have to put in term limits. We're going to have to think about strategic retirements to avoid unlimited. If you have term limits, they prevent strategic retirements. You don't have to worry about when's this guy going to retire, when's he going to die, when are we going to have an unexpected opening. You'll know when the openings are going to be. You can plan for them, and they ensure more democratic input into the court. The term limits are not enough, but it's possible that a Republican court would strike down term limits. But even if they did not, term limits wouldn't change the composition. We have to have more reforms than just term limits. We have to consider expanding the court. That's the only way to try and rebalance the court. Uh, right now, there's a majority of the court to kill any and all democratic measures to ensure there isn't a majority of the court that will kill any all democratic measures. Does that sound extreme? And to be fair, it does to many, but it is more extreme than invalidating a key provision in the Voting Rights Act on the basis of a missing ellipsis, or stopping a presidential vote count, or declaring the president is absolute immune, or inviting states to deny women's emergency care. That we have to consider extreme measures because they're doing extreme stuff, and we got to use extreme way to fight it. Yeah, attacking court might not be popular today. That doesn't mean it won't be popular tomorrow. At least the people are willing to put up the work to change people's minds. That's where the whole thing of politics come in. The company's media views are not just some fixed star. Biden's evolution on court reform confirmed that. There isn't a magic number of justices. Other countries look differently. You don't have to have 9. We've had more, we've had fewer. And we seriously have to think about having more. One of the good things to say is that things that are hard to change sometimes are easier to change after you've been through a crisis when you see how bad things can get. So once we're through this crisis, we might find that we'll have the political will to do some of these things. We can do jurisdiction stripping to say Congress can say what kinds of cases the court can and cannot hear. Congress created the federal court system, and Congress created the current structure of the Supreme Court. We have 9 justices because Congress said we should have 9 justices. We should have a binding code of ethics. Uh, we should reform the nomination process to have something more fair and transparent than what we have right now. Um, and we can expand the lower court's power through rotating justices. Expanding the lower court and dividing Supreme Court business among panels of justices can dilute outsized influence and make judicial reviews less susceptible to ideological swings. Rotating justices between the Supreme Court and lower courts or involving nonpartisan expertise in the appointment process. There's a lot of things that we have thought about. Congressional or executive oversight. We should have a way for Congress to more easily counter Supreme Court decisions. They can do it through new legislation. They can do it through constitutional amendments, which are difficult. And they can also do it by controlling judicial salaries and enforcement mechanisms. The executive branch, through enforcement discretion, influence how rulings are. Um, and we need to enforce campaign finance and anti-gerrymandering laws. Passing, passing and enforcing laws in these areas will help our government, and that in turn will help the structure and composition of the Supreme Court. Uh, Implementing some mix of these steps could really reduce the court's ability to erode our democracy the way they're doing now. So our call to action, we play a crucial role in driving reform. Meaningful change requires sustained public pressure, grassroots advocacies, participation in civil action. The major actions we can take, we can support and join advocacy organizations, groups like Demand Justice, United for Democracy, Common Cause, Stand Up America. These people organize campaigns, rallies, they lobby efforts focused on Supreme Court reform. You want to get involved, maybe throw them a few bucks or actually get involved in what they do. Those are the kind of groups that you should get involved with. Contact your elected representatives. Regularly write, call, meet with them if you can. Meet with your senators, your representatives, your local officials, and always bring up the Supreme Court reform bills and related legislation. Effective advocacy means we personalize these messages. Don't send them a form letter. Write to them from your heart. Write to them from your conscience. And don't just sign a mass petition. Online petitions are useless. Don't even waste your time on those. Participate in public demonstrations. Attend rallies, town halls. We should have tens of thousands of people in the streets these days with what's going on in this country. Educate and mobilize others. Spread the information you're hearing today. Mobilize family, friends, colleagues, and vote. Vote and prioritize judicial reform candidates. When you're talking to people and looking who you want to vote for, see what they've got to say about judicial reform. In presidential election use, the outcome can determine future appointments and the court's direction for years. It's really important to get this stuff right. Organize grassroots campaigns, create local advocacy groups. I noticed the other day that there's just a new Indivisible chapter out in Barrington. Just some people decided they got to do something, and all of a sudden there's a new group. Starts with maybe 10 or 15 people, but it can grow into a force. And everybody needs to be thinking about how they can participate in these kinds of things. Push media coverage, push public debate, write letters to the editors, encourage media outlets to cover these issues, facilitate open debate in public forums, newspapers, digital media. Talk about this stuff in your digital media because our action matters. Our large-scale reforms, any large-scale reforms, rarely occur without major citizen pressure on lawmakers and public institutions responsible for change. Grassroots mobilization, sustained activism, outspoken demands for accountability are essential to overcoming the political inertia and the vested interests and the power that the Supreme Court has to push us aside. That is what I've got. And that's what I need to do, need you all to do. And let me make it clear. I'm not going to do this. Nobody else is going to do this. You are going to do this. Nobody here, there's nobody to do this other than you. And that's the story. So I will send out these slides. And in fact, sometimes we get some questions where I have to do a little research to find the answer. If I get a question today where I say, I don't know, but I'll find out before I send out the slides, and I'll send the answers to the question along with the slides. So I imagine there's probably 100 questions out there. And please don't raise your hand to ask a question. Please put your question in the chat.
All right, Ed, are you ready?
I sure am.
All right. Garrick has a question. If Democrats win back the House and the Senate in the upcoming midterms, what can they do to address the corruption from the Supreme Court? Ed, would you like to see them, or Ed, what would you like to see them do?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things to do. One is to bring forth reasonable bills that would provide some measure of Supreme Court reform. Even if they don't get passed, I mean, you got to start somewhere. And a lot of times you'll see a bill put forward and it doesn't pass. And then they put it forward again next year and it gets a few more signatures and still doesn't pass. Then they refine it a little bit. They put it forward next year and it gets a few more signatures. And eventually it gets passed. You got to start. Even if you know it's not going to pass today, you got to start. So that's one thing. The other thing is one of the important things that Congress can do is they can have hearings where they dig into things and inform the public about things. Now, it's difficult to subpoena a Supreme Court judge, but you can subpoena people that have been affected. You can subpoena people who will show the harm that the Supreme Court decisions have done to our nation, even if you can't subpoena the judges themselves. So congressional investigations are important. Putting together bills that will make a difference are important. There's probably some other things I haven't thought off at the top of my head either, but if I think about them, I'll add them into the list. Or you know what? There may very well be people on the call here today who have some other suggestions, and they can put in a question like, question, wouldn't this kind of action be something Congress could take? So if you've got a thought about what Congress should do, put it in as a question.
Okay, Tanya Smith has a question. What, if anything, can be done? Are we not stuck with the Supremes?
Oh, not at all. First of all, the Constitution says that federal judges have their job for life unless they do something terrible and get impeached. But it doesn't say they stay in the same job for life, and they don't. Federal judges start as bench judges. Some of them move up to an appellate court. A few of them move up to the Supreme Court. So they're not in their jobs for life. There's no reason we couldn't make an even higher court a retirement court, which after some amount of time on the Supreme Court, you move these people into the higher court that is allowed to express opinions and do research, but they don't vote in the Supreme Court anymore. And you know, there's a precedent for that. When you're a bench judge or even an appellate judge, when you get older, you can say, you know, I really don't want to work every day anymore. You can become a retired judge. And what you are when you're a retired judge is you get to take a case if you want a case. If you see a case that you're interested in, you can say, I want to be the judge on that case. But you don't get assigned cases anymore. So the idea that a Supreme Court judge is got to be a Supreme Court judge for life is not in our Constitution, and we can change it. Let's see what else. So we can have we can force term limits, we can force age limits, we can force um, ethics laws that they have to follow, and that would require them to recuse themselves in matters where they have not followed the ethics laws. There's legislation that we can pass that will help reform this court. We're not just stuck with.
We hope not. All right, Ed. The next question is from Catherine. The court seems to be acting lawlessly like Trump, or decisions based more on ideology. Mark Warner on HCR podcast earlier answered question while typing, lawless court.
Is there a question here?
Well, the question first part was the court seems to be acting lawlessly like Trump, or decisions based more on ideology, question mark.
Yeah. Well, I think I've clearly agreed with that in the presentation. Absolutely. The whole idea that the Republican minority is being discriminated against because the country has moved away from them, and getting court decisions to protect an endangered minority along those lines is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
Okay, Judith is asking, or stating both. Ed seems to disapprove entirely of the power of judicial review from the get-go in 1803. What does he think the role of SCOTUS should have been? I agree with most of what Ed is saying. I'm just wondering about this one thing.
Well, I can understand the court looking at a law and saying that law doesn't conform to our Constitution, because the Constitution is here to protect our rights, um, and to stop government from running roughshod over us. But when the court looks at a law and says, "I don't think that law is good for our nation, and I'm not going to let you implement it," that's going too far. It's not their job to decide what's good for our nation. That's Congress's job. And um, a, a spectrum there. I mean, at one extreme, they're clearly saying this is unconstitutional, and I fully agree with that. If something's unconstitutional, they should stop it. At the other extreme, there are times when they say the Constitution doesn't say this is bad, but I don't think it's a good idea. The whole thing about granting presidential immunity. They did that because they thought it was a good idea. Well, that's not their job. Their job is not to decide what's good for the country. Their job is to decide if a law is constitutional, or if a law, um, actually, I think that's about it. Is the law constitutional? Um, and I imagine there might be times when there are two laws that are in conflict with one another, and so there probably are some areas where they have to judge something about laws. But just to invalidate a law because they don't think it's the right thing to do, like they're invalidating our voting rights laws. They said the voting rights laws, which are intended um, uh, to compensate for um, discrimination, are no longer necessary because there's no longer any discrimination. And they struck down that part of that law. That should not be their prerogative. Congress should strike down that part of the law if Congress agrees that discrimination is no longer a problem. Because we know darn well that discrimination is still a problem. It's just they don't know it because they don't live in the real world. They don't live with us. They live in their castles with their billionaire buddies. So at that extreme, when they can say, I don't like this law and I'm going to strike it down just because I think it's not necessary anymore, they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't be able to do that. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, Bruce has a question for you. Did the overruling of Chevron completely eliminate the purpose of these agencies to enact rules or only limit their powers if they are challenged in the courts?
No, I think that it doesn't completely eliminate those agencies because the agencies are there to administer our laws. The question is, um, how much discretion do they have in determining what the law is? If Congress writes an explicit rule, a very explicit rule that says the administration will do this in this manner with this much money, and that's what you're going to do, then we don't need the Chevron rule because the Congress has told us exactly what to do. But when the Congress says the administration will take steps to reduce pollution and improve air quality, that's really vague. And in that case, the EPA has to figure out, at the point where Congress said that, nobody really knew what the right steps were. The people and Congress decided this air pollution was a problem. We got to do something about it. I don't know what to do. We're going to direct the administration to figure out what to do. That's where the Chevron doctrine comes in. When you have that kind of a law passed, the court has now said the administration doesn't have the right to decide. The courts will decide. And I suppose it's really only effective when their rule is challenged in court. I imagine if the administration creates a rule and nobody challenges it, then SCOTUS is not going to get involved. I mean, SCOTUS doesn't initiate suits, but SCOTUS often says, I wonder if this is legal. And that is an invitation for somebody at some level to initiate a suit that will eventually come to SCOTUS, where SCOTUS say, you know what, you're right, that's not legal. So it doesn't completely eliminate the organization's power, but it does give the judiciary and SCOTUS the power to override the administration when administration experts have decided that what Congress's intent is best implemented this way. The courts can say, nah, Congress has got to tell you exactly how to do it. You can't just make it up. And if you make it up and somebody challenges you, then you lose.
Okay, S. Linden's question. Could we get rid of the shadow dockets, or is there a reasonable use for them?
Well, I mean, there's a reasonable use for a shadow for an emergency an emergency. I don't think you can get rid of them. There's a reasonable use for getting an emergency order because things happen quickly. Courts generally can't come up with a real well-reasoned, long thought out, proper decision, which becomes a Supreme Court precedent, which lasts for decades overnight. But sometimes you need an answer overnight. I don't think you can get rid of the shadow docket. I think the problem is that the people running the shadow docket are biased, and they're just always ruling in favor of the administration, even when lower courts, all kinds of lower courts, have said this is wrong. The lower courts, several lower courts have said X is wrong. We shouldn't allow it to happen. They appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, well, I can't decide that right now. And the Supreme Court could say one of two things. It could say, I'll let the lower court ruling stand while we think about it. Or the court can say, I'll block the lower court ruling while we think about it. And routinely, they let the lower court thing stand if it's in favor of the Republican Party's viewpoint. So I don't think you can get rid of the shadow docket. I think what you have to do is get rid of the overly extremely right-wing bias in the court.
Okay. S. Linden has another question for you. Does a shadow docket ruling create legal precedent?
No, it does not. The shadow docket ruling simply says, for the moment, go ahead and do what you're doing, or for the moment, you can't do what you're doing. But it doesn't create a precedent. The precedent is created next June when the court finally issues a decision. And next June, whatever the decision is, the damage has probably already been done by by if the court if the president is dismantling an executive agency and somebody says Congress created this agency, you shouldn't have the right to dismantle it, and some judge rules you're right, they should not have the right to dismantle this agency, and Supreme Court says, well, I don't know, I got to think about it, but for the moment I'm going to let them go ahead and dismantle it. Well, next June, by the time the court decides that maybe they shouldn't have, it's too late. They already dismantled it. It's already gone. It would have to be rebuilt. So it's not a precedent, but it's extremely damaging. It can be extremely damaging.
Okay, Amy's asking, aren't the Dirty Six using the shadow docket in unprecedented ways to overturn lower courts' rulings? Many Fed judges are appalled.
Yes, you're right. This is this shows how biased the court is. The the vast majority of lower court rulings that reach SCOTUS um, are are not upheld the way the lower courts see things. Um, and and for example, lower courts routinely said the president should not. The president appears to have tried to overturn an election, and that means that he should not be allowed to run for office again. That was clear to lower courts, but SCOTUS said, "Nah, let him run." So yes, the lower courts are aghast at what at most of the lower courts are aghast at what the Supreme Court is doing because they're not biased. They're not extremely biased the way the upper court is. And this is similar to another thing that's happening in our country. Um, the lower court is more biased. Excuse me, the Supreme Court is more biased than the lower courts. Our Congress is more polarized than our population. Um, we've gotten, and in fact, the fact that our Congress is more polarized than the population is why they created a Supreme Court that is more biased than the lower courts.
Okay, Catherine has a statement and question. Seems that some Democrats are countering moves. Judges seem to be stepping up. Yes, said by Justice Sotomayor, read the decisions. Is that reasonable to expect the common voter to do that? So how do we get common people to get this info?
Okay, so go back to the organizations that I mentioned. In fact, I still got the slides up where I can see them. So let me just back up a little bit. Um, Groups like Demand Justice, United for Democracy, Common Cause, Stand Up America, even groups like Indivisible. Um, I spend time researching this stuff so you don't have to. And I get the message to you in a consumable form. I'm sending these slides out. You can read through some of them. You can pick up one or two things that you think are important and start talking about them to people. You can follow groups like Demand Justice, United for Democracy, Common Cause, Stand Up America, and see what they have to say. These groups are looking at this stuff. There are good journalists who are looking at this stuff. Uh, Heather Cox Richardson is a professor of history who every day writes a blog about what's going on to help you understand what's going on. Just if you just subscribe, find Heather Cox Richardson and subscribe to her blog and get one email a day from her, you will be well informed. You don't have to do the kind of research I do. There are people who do it for you, but you do have to talk about it. When you are informed about something, don't just say, "Oh, that's terrible." Start raising hell about
Okay, Nora's question and statement first. I assume that the Voting Rights Act will be meaningless since they have been destroying it for so long, and now Section 2 will probably be gutted. Trump believes he has the power to control the elections. What actions do you think he will take? I'm afraid there will be troops at polling places.
it. Okay, let me talk about that. First of all, maybe you don't. I'm deeply involved in running elections. I run an early voting site. I work with the League of Women Voters to talk to Cook County and the city of Chicago about how we run elections around here. I've taken election administrative courses, um, and I've seen what was happening recently. There was just a high-profile election in New York City as a primary for their mayoral race. Um, there was a lot of concern along these lines, and they did a few things. One of the things they did is they put together groups of citizens who would work in the areas of the city where ICE might want to be present. And they worked to find ways to help people get to the polling place without walking past an ICE agent. Um, so there was a lot of community organizing to ensure that the election wasn't affected by federal agents. And in fact, no federal agents showed up. There weren't any federal agents hanging around polling places or trying to interfere with the election at all. So, I mean, that's a good sign. It's a good sign that we understand the risk, and the election authorities understand the risk. When I attend meetings of the Election Protection Coalition, all they're talking about is what might happen. How can we defend against it? And these are election administrators. These are people who understand what's going on. They understand that we got to do something about it. They wanted to hear what happened in New York. How did New York handle it? How can we adapt those techniques to our own city? You know, one of the most important tools we have right now against ICE is a whistle, and we give away whistles to people, tell people how to use whistles to make sure everyone understands there's some ICE agents around here. You better get indoors or walk down the other block or something. Don't walk down that block. Um, there's plenty of community organization, and it's in coordination with the election administration. So uh, states run elections. The federal government has no legal authority to interfere in an election. And um, if I find ICE agents within 100 feet of the polling place, I'm going to call the state police. And the state police are going to have a discussion with them because they can't be there. They can't legally intimidate voters. They didn't try it in New York. We were organized to fight against it. And I think that since states run elections and states know this stuff is important, and you know what, if there's intimidation in a red state and some red state doesn't get as much votes out as they want, I don't care about that. But they're not going to do it in my state. They're not going to do it in a blue state. We're not going to let them. Don't worry about it. But do stay aware. And if you see opportunities to be involved, do get involved. If you see an opportunity to work in a Latino neighborhood where you can help legal Latinos organize to um, to help make voting safer in their community, so that all legal people get to vote and nobody's intimidated out of voting. That'd be great to get involved in that kind of stuff.
Okay, Robert is asking, are we at the point described in the Declaration of Independence where the people have the right to change the government in view of the fact that the government holds minority opinions?
No, no. Um, First of all, under our Constitution, we don't have the right to overthrow our government. Okay, uh, I want no uh, disinformation about that. We're we cannot have a rebellion. We have to solve this through voting, and we can and will solve it through voting, through political action, through our court system, through legal processes, through due process, the legal due process, and our political electoral due process. Um, this isn't the first time this country's been in this situation. Heck, we had a civil war in this country, and we survived that. We had Andrew Jackson in office, who was kind of the same way Trump is in terms of not caring about the rule of law and about threatening congressmen. Uh, and we got past that. We'll get past this too. We don't need to have a rebellion or a revolution to get past this. We need to stand on the principles that our founders put in place of due process, of fair political processes, fair elections, and the election of the members would be a lot of fun. Those guys are going to get their heads handed to them.
Okay, Judith has a question, which is a bit lengthy, so bear with me. The late Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, Republican appointed, used to make a point of considering a decision's potential impact on society before making her decisions. Yet many of the present justices make a point of not doing so, apparently on the grounds that legal purity or something shouldn't allow such considerations. How is this justifiable? Judging from the level of their personal corruption, the present justices are quite aware of the outside world, yet they won't consider the impact of their decisions?
I'm not so sure they're all quite aware of the outside world. They don't live in the outside world. They don't think, they probably did not foresee some of the negative aspects of some of their decisions. They're 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 being driven by extreme political forces, and extreme political forces are out to get what they want for their people, uh, and the rest of us be damned. Um, and they put judges in place who will do that without thinking about us. Um, I think that Senator Dale O'Connor is the kind of judge I'd like to see on the court, who will think about what's best for the country, not what's best for some vested interest that is flying me around on jets or throwing parties at Mar-a-Lago. Um, and yeah, so the the you're right that the judges are not thinking about what's good for the country. They're thinking about what's good for some small vested interest, and they're finding legal reasons to support their small vested interest. And I don't think it's because they know the impact of what they're doing. I think it's because they don't care about any potential impact of what they're doing. They just don't care. They don't live in the real world. They don't think about the real world. They only think about the political forces that are pushing them, and they're responding to those forces and doing damage to our country in doing so.
Okay, Satya is a question, kind of a statement, sort of. For attorneys, I've been told that the 10th Amendment has been used one or two times in court cases. That broadly, or is that broadly or two times more specifically?
This is the kind of question where I'll have to do some research.
Yeah,
Let me take a note. I will research the issue of how the 10th Amendment works into all of this, and I'll add some notes into the material we send out with the slides.
okay. All right, Satya's next question. I've been told, this might be another inquiry here. I've been told that the Ninth Amendment has not been used in court cases yet, as in only Supreme Court cases?
I'll add that to the list of research.
Okay. And Ed, if you want me to send those to you, I can do that too.
No, I've got them. I've got notes already.
Okay, good. All right, Nora's question. I believe you mentioned the special question doctrine. What is this?
Oh, I'd have to go back and look. Look, I'll add that to the list and put a detailed description of the essential questions doctrine into the research
Oh,
that I'll publish along with the slides.
okay.
Also, essential questions doctrine. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, Catherine is asking, how did they get this far? Is it there's closet extremists in office? OMG, I can't see how they all think this country, life in the US is so bad. So this goes way back and people slash corpse, like the Koch brothers, I'm gonna say, now tech bros, also religious cult members, taxes, taxes, Koch.
So how did it get so bad? There's a question that's
Yeah.
being asked. Um, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court is is structured by Congress, um, and the Supreme Court is um, very far to the right, because um, some extremely right forces in Congress built it, and those extreme right forces in Congress um, got there in large part because our election systems are messed up. Our elections don't our representatives don't represent the general election voters. Our manner of selecting candidates in primary elections are low turnout elections. They're um, controlled by extreme elements of parties. And when you have safe districts, you'll find that primary elections will bring forth extreme candidates, knowing full well they're going to win in the general election. As a result, 85% of the U.S. House of Representatives weren't really elected in the general election. They were elected in partisan primaries, low turnout partisan primaries, by 8% of our voters. So our legislators aren't representing us. They're representing the political extremes. And when the political extremes get in Congress, they do extreme stuff, like build an extremely right-wing um, Supreme Court. So, at the bottom line, in order to fix this stuff, we really have to fix our electoral systems too. And we've done other presentations on that. But part of fixing our election systems is is understanding the damage that is happening because they don't work. When we talk about the damage that's happening when our election systems don't work, we're motivated to fix our elections, to elect better representatives, to fix the political systems like the partisan primaries. It's not a simple thing, okay? It's something that has been going in the wrong direction for decades, and it's going to take decades to straighten it out, I'm sure. But we will straighten it out as long as we all pay attention. We all see what's going wrong. We all talk about it. We all push for change. And when we push for change, change will happen, and we'll get to a better spot.
Okay, Bruce is asking, but on the shadow docket, they have not allowed the president to fire a member of the board of the Federal Reserve or
That's
the
right.
head of the Copyright Office. Don't you believe that will hold up when this case is tried on the merits?
Yes, but the important thing to note is this. They're on the shadow docket, they're allowing um, things to go forward that hurt most of us, but they didn't allow to go forward the thing that could hurt them because they all have stock funds. That just shows the bias in the shadow docket. They're perfectly willing to throw all of us under the bus, but when something comes up that affects them, they're going to take care to make sure the right thing is.
Okay, S. Linden is asking, how can Congress do an end run around a horrible SCOTUS decision?
It's not an end run. You pass a law. If SCOTUS says some law is unconstitutional, um, you simply figure out what part of it is unconstitutional and you pass another version that takes out that little part. Or if SCOTUS says we don't need anti-discrimination voting rules anymore, you reinforce the law, you pass it again, and Congress says yes, we do. And when if Congress would pass it again, they couldn't just dismantle it immediately because they can't just say it's very difficult for them to just say you're completely wrong. Um, they might try, but Congress is in charge of this country, and Congress doesn't have to do an end run around the Supreme Court. Congress can just pass a damn law that gets what we want for this country. And as long as they do it in a manner that's constitutional, it ought to survive.
Kitty is asking, Why is there not more focus on the financial impact of Republican measures such as imprisoning and deporting immigrants, storming cities with ICE agents, etc., on the taxpayer? People need to know how much money is being pulled from taxpayers and redirected or wasted, while the poor get less support and food assistance, medical care, etc. I believe that if more people understood the actual costs, not in hard, not as hard to comprehend numbers like billions and trillions, but in numbers like XXX of people could be fed and housed for one day of ICE deployment in Chicago.
Well, that's all true, but it's kind of far away from SCOTUS. I mean, those are all political considerations. Those are all the kind of considerations which are exactly why they're going to get their head handed to them in November. Um, but to take it another step further and to say, the politicians are doing terrible stuff and SCOTUS is letting them, uh, the real responsibility is the politician who's doing the horrible stuff. And I don't think that you need to focus on the damaging effects of what the politicians are doing to come at the Supreme Court. It's enough to focus on the damaging aspects of what the Supreme Court themselves are doing. So when we focus on women who can't get medical services until they're almost dead, that's the kind of thing that you can lay right directly at SCOTUS's feet. Whereas if you say ICE is wasting money, you can't lay that directly at SCOTUS's feet. That really gets laid at Trump's feet, and SCOTUS is just a participant in that. So for the purposes of reforming the Supreme Court, it's better to go directly at the things that they themselves are doing that are hurting us.
Okay, Garrick's
Not to
question.
say we shouldn't care about all the economic things you mentioned. We should care about all of those, but we should care about those more with respect of kicking these jerks out of office,
Yes.
and maybe even prosecuting some of them when we get control, when we get power back. I mean, some admiral who says I had the right to kill these stranded sailors, he might be fine right now, but 4 years from now, he might be facing a court martial.
Okay, Garrick is asking, why have Democrats on the Judiciary Committee? Okay, why have Democrats on the Judiciary Committee? I'm thinking of my Senator Dick Durbin, gave their approval for so many of the dictator-in-chief nominations, especially at the lower level. Have our Dems on the committee let America down?
I got my problems with Senator Durbin, who's my senator as well, along these lines too. Um, the fact of the matter is that we don't have the votes to stop any of these candidates. Um, they're going to get the candidates they want. Um, Voting against, I think if you're going to vote against some candidates, you gotta reserve it for the most obvious ones. Voting against Hegseth is different against voting against Bessett. I mean, Bessett's not a drunk. Um, Bessett has experience that matters. You kind of have to give Bessett a shot and let him screw up before you can say he's the wrong man for the job. Whereas a guy like Hegseth, you can just look at him and say he's the wrong man for the job. I'm not going to vote for him. So I kind of understand why Durbin and others let some of these guys through because they're going to get through anyway. It doesn't matter how we vote. All they need is a majority, and they got the majority.
Okay, Catherine is inquiring, what can be reversed? The actions by this bunch of question mark, question mark. Look what they have done.
Well, first of all, for example, look at USA. Look what they've done. They've completely dismantled it. They've wasted tons of money. What can be done? Well, we can get control of the government back. We can rebuild USA. We can spend a lot more money and put it all back together again. We can do that. We can do that. It'll take us 10 years, but we can do it. It can be done. Um, people who were fired um, that need to find jobs. Um, there'll be openings. They might not want to come back. They might not trust us anymore. But we can do something for them. We can go back and give them a retroactive pay package of some kind. But we got to get control of the government to do it. So um, there's not tons of stuff we can do to fix things right this moment. But there are a few things supporting the organizations that file lawsuits, supporting the organizations that help people under attack. Um, those are things we can do right now. Uh, building the building the political will and the coalitions to win next November and get at least the House, if not the Senate too. It might even be possible to get the Senate. Um, that kind of groundwork we need to be doing right now, especially since primaries are going to come up early next year. We got to make sure we get the right candidates in place. So don't give up hope. We can fix this. Heck, we can fix this in my lifetime, and I am already 76. So I have a lot of confidence that we can fix this.
All right, Ed. Constance is asking, to set the stage for court reform, including expansion, is a new commission needed chaired by someone like Michael Ludig, or would Biden's commission be sufficient to lay the groundwork for change?
I suspect that Biden's commission is sufficient, but I'm not sure. So this is another one I'm going to do a little research on and answer. Um, is Biden's commission what we need or another? I'll look into that in a little more depth and include some comments about that when we send the slides out.
Okay, thank you. I know J. Michael Ludig is very good, but S. Linden's question, providing term limits are passed as a reform, can they be retroactive to apply to existing judges?
I believe they can. Yes, I see no reason why you couldn't put in term limits or age limits and have them apply immediately. Now, we might
Okay.
not want to do that. We might not want to be that severe, but I see no reason why we couldn't be. It might be harder to pass the law if we write it that severely, but I think we could. I mean, there's no reason that Congress couldn't do it except the political will to do it.
Okay, there are more questions in the chat. Would you like more, Ed?
Let's go until 9.
Okay. Let me get back to Ellen's question. It seems that ethics laws have been narrowed by the Federalist Society. Is there a way to remove the undue influence of the Federalist Society or other think tanks like the Heritage Society, which we know from our study of Project 2025 in sorting soup meetings that meet at 5 on Thursdays? It would be good to hear your ideas on how to undo Project 2025 based on the book we are reading.
Well, I do know quite a bit about Project 2025. I spent many hours arguing against it before the last election. Um, it, it, I think that there's two things to be said here. One is that it's not enough. It's not enough to have a think tank. You also have to put money behind it. Uh, Here's a story. I know this lady, Sarah Kisnick, who's been very active in gun violence prevention for decades. And I've worked with her in the past, and I'm on the board of one of her organizations right now. And she used to think that if we organize effectively, if we make the right arguments, we can get somewhere. And after butting her head against a brick wall for a decade, she came to realize that we also need money. So she formed a 501c4 so we could raise political money and support candidates with money that will do the right thing for us. So the Heritage Foundation can come up with all the plans they want, but they also come up with money. to push those plans. So campaign finance reform will help. That's the first thing. If they write a book, but they can't spend a lot of money pushing it, they'll be less effective. The other thing is we have to be as organized as they are. We don't have anything like the Heritage Foundation, and we should. If we were as effectively organized as they are, we could push back more effectively than we do. So those are two things that we got to do: campaign finance reform and get organized the same way they're organized. And one of the problems there is that they're very narrowly focused. You know, they want to turn the clock back and have the America of 1950. Um, and that's an easier thing to push than we want to go forward on all fronts. We want to do better on healthcare. We want to do better on economics. We want to do better on social justice. We want to do better on women's rights. We want to do better on everything. So we're not as focused as they are. That makes it harder for us. But still, we need to get organized to the same level that the Heritage Foundation is. And we, you know, if there's an organization that is overly influential in picking Supreme Court justices, well, part of the problem is our fault that we didn't build a similar organization which is effective in pushing progressive Supreme Court justices. So we got to look at what they do. We got to learn to meet their effort and hand back what they do to us.
Okay. Give me one moment, Ed. Okay, Ellen has another question for you. I read that in the past, the Supreme Court was better because their wives and them met every Sunday, which forced them to be personally and subjectively honest about their decisions. What do you think about that?
I think that would be hard to legislate. I think that if you get the right people in there, that kind of thing will happen. That kind of thing doesn't happen now because you got the wrong kind of people in there. So I don't see what you've just described as a way to fix the court. I think I see what you just described as evidence of a well-structured and well-operating court.
Okay, Kathy's question is, so do you think Democratic states can gerrymander districts to get more Dems in office in the same numbers as Republicans? Today, SCOTUS voted to allow Texas to gerrymander districts so 5 more Republican seats can happen.
Well, this is tangential to our discussion of SCOTUS here. That's okay. Hey, California is getting 5 seats in the other direction. New York is going to do something. We're going to do something. There will be a battle here that will not be good for the country because the more gerrymandered we are, the more safe seats there are, and the more power we're handing to partisan primaries to bring radical candidates into the general election that are going to get elected. So it's not good. But there's 2 things I'll say about that. One is they won't get very many net seats. They'll get a few more than we will. And that's not going to be enough to save them because the typical swing is about 13 seats. We're not going to have the typical swing. We're going to have double the typical swing, given what's going on in our country. We're going to have a 26-seat swing, something like that. So if they get 4 extra seats net total, it's not going to make a difference. But the other thing is, I think they're screwing up because what they're doing is they're gerrymandering based on the numbers they got in 2024. And that means they're spreading themselves too thin, in my experience, in my estimation. Let's say they had a state where you had 10 safe seats out of 15. And now they've changed it so they got 12 safe seats out of 15. But each of those seats is less safe than the 10 were. And if you think that you're going to get the same results in 2028 as you got in 2024, and that all those seats will be safe anyway, even though you took a risk and you made them less safe, I think some of those things will backfire. And some of those seats that they decided were new safe seats aren't going to be safe because there's going to be such a pushback against what's going on in this country. They're going to lose some of those seats. So I am not worried about this. I'm not worried about the short term effects of this gerrymandering thing in terms of what's going to happen in the House election next year. But I am worried about the fact that we're just getting even more and more polarized and more separated and more safe seats where now 90% of the House seats will be elected by 5% of the population instead of 85% being selected by 8% of the population. That's not good. And that's one of the areas where, when all the dust settles, we got to get a law through Congress to make this nonsense illegal.
Okay, Ed, it is 8:57.
One more question.
One more
Last one. Make it a good one.
question. Oh, I don't know if I got any good ones for you, but I'll take this one and give it to you and you tell me. Another from Ellen. I think we should review how law schools are biasing our justice system based on who they allow to be professors and who they accept as students. No, we have
I don't
to,
see any evidence for that at all.
right.
All the lower court judges are making the right decisions. The problem isn't the law school. The problem is the way we select Supreme Court judges. Now, Bill, I think you had a question you wanted to cover, didn't you?
I did.
Oh, you
I
did?
did. And I think I might have inkled what that question was earlier. But just based on all of the information you have shared, not only on this call, but all the other collective calls, kind of your infinite knowledge on these things, Bears or Packers?
Okay, so let me say something about that. I don't follow sports much. I don't follow sports hardly at all. But I once went in as a subcontractor in a company where they had a pool, a football pool. And I won the thing 3 times in a row, even though I don't have any idea how this works. I just have this feeling in my head about which teams are more powerful and what. And my feeling is that the Bears are going to win, even though I don't know anything about it. So I think Bill knows more than I do, but the Bears are going
Okay. Well, I just wanted to put a little levity on it. Ed, just thank you so much for what you do. It was not too many years ago that I remember when you first came into NWSOFA to learn how to organize, and you did a great job on that very first project, which was on gun violence prevention, and that was an amazing thing. And you have followed that path beautifully through all of this time. This was an important discussion. It's a very timely one, although I think the discussion that you're going to have in just a couple of weeks, I believe that's the 18th on a Wednesday, is
no.
going to
It's
be,
Thursday. Got to be 2 weeks from the day.
oh, it's Thursday. Okay.
2 weeks
Okay,
from the day.
Thursday. All right. And that's going to be on the blowing up of the ships and Venezuela and what the hell are we doing?
I got a lot to say about
That's great. That is really great. Um, just to kind of close this thing off, thank you for all the time that you took in answering all those questions. And Debbie, thank you so much for grabbing those questions and organizing them in a way to present them to Ed. Uh, we have other programs that are going on. For those of you who uh, like pizza, we have a in-person meeting this next Tuesday at Moretti's in Mount Prospect, 4 to 7. Our famous pizza night, where we gather and we just talk. And we have changed the format a little bit, so we can talk politics now. And so not just issues, but politics. And that's because we are doing open contributions rather than putting it on the tab of Indivisible. For those of you who have been involved in our Vision Forward, that is on Wednesday evening, this coming Wednesday evening. Pizza Night's Tuesday, 4 to 7, in person. The Vision Forward is Wednesday at 7 o'clock, and this will probably be the 7th or 8th of the Vision Forward, basically looking at what we should be doing into the future. Uh, as we all know, as an organization, we tend to react to the issue of the day. And boy, that gets out. We have been spinning in circles for quite a while here. So, Vision Forward puts a focus on that and keeps us grounded to the most important issues and what we should be preparing for. But it's no secret that Ed said it about 50 times during his presentation. Vote. It's the voting. It's getting people in office that is the most important thing to get anything accomplished. And so we've got several of these things this Sunday night. If you're in person, we have our 13th annual gun violence our gun violence remembrance, starting from Sandy Hook. That was our very first issue group back when that first happened. And this is our 13th annual remembrance. We have 8 different speakers from 5 different faiths that will be presenting at the United Methodist Church in Arlington Heights. We're also going to be doing a Zoom, which we've done for the last 2 years. And we'll open the Zoom at 7 p.m. The in-person starts at 6:30 because there are cookies and coffee and hot chocolate. So, and we'll have tables there for the different sponsoring groups, which are about 7 or 8 different sponsoring groups that'll want to talk to you about what we can do. So that's just some things that are coming up. Our organization has just been just amazing. I remember when I first joined the organization, I was one of 17. Today, we have 9,700 locally members, and we have 23,000 because of our adoption of Zoom and keeping it going that are now our national Zoom members. And we actually had one of our members from it's from South America, John, on today. I don't know if he's still on or not, but Ecuador he's from. But it's been a great thing, and Ed, you are part of the glue that's kind of brought the organization together with your every month programs to keep us informed. So thank you so much, Ed, and to everybody who's still on. I know a lot of folk have left after 2 hours. Thank you very much for being part of this community and being part of this process. Hopefully, we all take a little bit of this, 1 or 2 salient points today, and can put it into practice. We will send out a link to the video. You can also find the video on our NWSOFA.org website. It's under the tab that says YouTube video, and you'll see literally 200 or 300 videos there that we've had over time. But you want to look at the live videos, and you'll be looking for Ed's picture at the very top, and that is what would be great. And we're getting anywhere from 100 to 200 people who drop in and pull those videos. What they do with them, God only knows, Ed. But I hope they're spreading them around to their particular groups. That is how this thing works.
And Bill,
Also,
I have
yes,
something else for you.
okay.
Kathy Neekers just put in the chat here. Also, don't forget the Shy City Impact and POC Food and Clothing Drive on Saturday, 12/13, 2:30 to 4 at GPAD.
Thank you very much. I was just going to do that. I was trying to separate the in-person from the Zooms back and forth. But
Sorry.
Kathy, thank you so much for bringing that up. And That'll be an interesting one. The way we have to do drop off, and it'll be a little cold. So thank you all for putting up with us. Ed, thank you so much for what a great presentation and all the work you put into getting these things. And I know that you look at those questions that'll be sent to you and we'll respond to many of them. All
Yes,
right. Good night,
thank
everyone.
all of you. Thank all of you for being here, and thank you, Bill, for organizing this whole affair. What an amazing circus you run. Thank you.
Circus, huh?
Hey,
We're
so
not
you
under that
never,
tent. We're not under that tent.
did you ever answer the question, Bears or Packers?
I did answer it. You forgot?
You did say Bears. I do remember that.
I did say, based on everything I know, which isn't much about this, the Bears are going to win.
All
Good night,
right.
y'all.
You heard it here. I'll probably edit this portion out. Okay. Bye now. Sorry about that, Eric or Garrett, if you're still on.
Hey, Bill, before you
Yes.
go, we have somebody in the chat asking, where is GPAD?
Oh, GPAD is the Greater Palatine Area Democrats office, which happens to be in Arlington Heights on Highway 14, just south of where the Arlington Park horse racing track was. So it's also the Wheeling Dems office. They share it, the Wheeling Dems and the Palatine Dems. And the address of that, I'm stalling, looking for it. I want to say 1210 West 14. Oh, geez.
I asked tough
Kathy,
questions.
Kathy Nikris, do you have that?
Let's see, is she still on?
I'm
Kathy, if
looking
you
it
could
up right
raise
now,
your
Bill.
hand.
I'm looking it up right now, Bill.
Okay.
Oh, good. I just closed my other computer down.
Oh, that didn't work.
Address of Greater Palatine Area Democrats.
It's 1310 West Northwest Highway.
You were
Yes,
close, Bill.
1310 West Northwest Highway, Arlington Heights. It's not in Palatine. If you put in Palatine, you'll end up about 4 miles away. So it's 1310 West Northwest Highway, Arlington Heights, Illinois, and Northwest Highway is Highway 14. All right, everybody. Hopefully you can take this information, enjoy it. If you're local, join us at the United Methodist Church on Sunday night, a week from this Sunday, then drop off canned foods, clothing, whatever for the needy in Chicago. Thank you all. Have a great evening. Thank you, Ed.
Night.